Diego and his team at Oak City Tech on basically how to get found and how your future clients can find you. So go to oakcitytech.com, tell them what you're looking for. I know they'll be able to help you. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Manning. Each week on Triangle BNI, we bring you a local small business success story. If you are not familiar with BNI, it is Business Networking International, the world's largest networking organization. Our little slice of heaven here in the Triangle, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. Each week, about 35 chapters and over 520-ish members get together, and our goal is to help each other grow our businesses. And our local small business success story this week is Traci Phillips. Traci is the Innate Coach. We will get to that and explain that more. Traci is also in RD27, the Bull City Business Leaders. They meet Thursday mornings at 11:30. Right now, they're on Zoom, but eventually be back at somewhere, and I will let Traci talk about that. But Traci, glad to have you on the show. How are you?
Oh, it's so wonderful to be here, Mike. Thanks. I'm doing well.
Oh, glad
Thank
to
you.
have you. Okay, so now let's go to your chapter first, Bull City
Mhm.
Business Leaders. I tell people in all the talks I do, in all the training I do, that you guys, for sports fans, they'll get this. You guys are the Manchester United and New York Yankees of Triangle BNI. You are the most decorated, biggest, baddest daddy in the triangle, but for a reason. You guys normally go, I know prior to COVID, you had the highest count I saw was, I think, 54 members.
Mhm.
Do you like that? And was that attractive to you when you joined?
Yeah. So, it's always one of those things. It's like, how do you act when somebody tells you you're the best of the best? Hopefully, humbly is the
Yeah.
answer to that question. But when I joined, so I'm in my seventh year with this particular chapter. And when I joined, we were about 30 some members. I don't remember exactly, somewhere in there. So we grew quite a bit. And as you know, being in BNI, I mean, we grow, it's accordion, right? We can grow
Yes.
and shrink. And we've had some attrition, as a lot of chapters have, during the COVID time that we're in. And but I love it. I mean, we were meeting at Parazad, which is just an incredible restaurant in Durham. And they had this back room. And I mean, we did feel like celebrities, every time. It's like the whole staff would come and, wait on us. And it was really great. Obviously, as we've all pivoted and tried to keep those connections and build, and continue on, our leadership team is extraordinary, and I've been so impressed with how they've managed everything. But yeah, I enjoy it. I love the chapter.
It is impressive to watch. Because basically there's not a time limit on BNI meetings, but there is, because you want to be aware of everybody else's time. And to do everything you guys do with 42 or 48 or 54 members is impressive. But I know I visited a few weeks ago, just very welcoming. So your chapter, my chapter meet at the same time, so I don't get to visit very often, but it was a lot of fun. This is Business Coach Day because we're both business coaches, and I love learning. My mom, for years, just kept telling me, keep reading, keep learning, and everything. The Innate Coach, what does that mean?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, as you can imagine. So first of all, I do work with business owners. I don't consider myself a business coach because my focus with those owners is really on their unique performance as leaders. And so leadership performance and executive coaching is really my bent. But the innate coach actually came from a number of years ago. I was, kind of just entering the leadership coaching arena because I started out actually as a holistic health coach. And, of course, as anything else, there's a story there. But I was talking to a client and they said, we spend a lot of time discussing what's innate about my person. And I thought, I am so borrowing that. Like, I think that is exactly what I do, is really tap into the innate value that a person offers, and then really understanding and defining and aligning that to their leadership performance.
And by the definition of innate is what?
So it's inherent. It's what you're born with, right?
Gotcha.
So I believe there's kind of different categories of skill sets. Those that, those traits, those values, those gifts, if you want to call it, that you're born with are your innate traits, right? And then the learned and earned are your acquired skill sets, right? Those are the things that you learn that we've learned once we came out of the womb and we started to have experiences in life. And so, really, the innate values that we have, I believe, are our truest and most impactful values. Although we've learned it kind of the opposite, right? Is that our greatest value in the world, especially in our careers, is what we've learned and earned. And yet, feel that's really the category that's here to support our
It
innate
yeah,
value.
and most of my analogies are sports related. Let me
I
see if
love
I get
that.
th let me see if I get this right. A lot of times in baseball, excuse me, a lot of times in baseball, late in the game, we'll hear that a manager made a switch of a player because he thought, "You know what? I had a hunch about this guy today."
Mhm.
Do we rely on our that innate as well, do we bury that more than we should? And where are some good times to trot those out?
Well, that's a really great question. And I worked at a boys' school for my last part of my, we were just talking about this beforehand, the last part of my teaching career, which is what I did before coaching. And so, because I worked with boys a lot, I do a lot of sports analogies too.
Good.
I appreciate those. Um, Much of the time, our innate value is a blind spot to us. And I give the example of myself when I was growing up. I was told I was a troublemaker a lot. And I actually even remember as a kid being confused by that when I was being called out on the carpet, because a lot of what I now understand, I didn't obviously then, and for many years I didn't, is that I have this innate ability to read truth in language, right? So I can read patterns in language, I can read intonation, and this is something I've always done. And as a child, I would do that, and I could tell when things weren't, like, people weren't telling the truth, or they weren't
Wow.
aligned in their language, right? And I would say something about it. And as you can imagine, I got in trouble. And so, what for the longest time I thought this thing that I did was bad, right? That it was not a value trait at all. It was the opposite. And it wasn't until I was in coaching that I had a friend of mine who invited me to do a stint with her. She was a clinical psychologist at Butner Federal Prison, and had created a men's transformational program with the white collar camp that they have there. So these were like the Bernie Madoffs, right? Very successful men, had been very well respected, but obviously committed federal crimes. And so she felt that they really, because they were in for a shorter period of time than many of the criminals in federal prison, that she wanted to make the most out of that time for them. She says, I don't feel like we're really serving them while they're in here. Um, and so she created this program and invited me in because she said, as a linguistic profiler, you could be really beneficial for these men, teaching them how their internal communications are affecting their external communication, but also the decisions they're making, their outcomes. And my response to that was, what? I'm a what?
Yeah.
So she explained to me what that meant. I didn't even know that's what I was doing. So, it wasn't until much later, because of this experience, that I was able to even learn the value of that innate trait. So oftentimes we don't know. We go through our whole lives, just kind of accidentally, doing certain things in a genius way and not even knowing, what we're doing that's special.
Does some of that come from, and you and I are both parents, and we'll get into that in a little bit too. Does some of that come from the parents where I guess sometimes not know we're doing this, but kind of we see one of our kids do something and we not nudge them that way, but maybe don't flush out some things that they might be interested, but they may have not communicated that fully to us.
Yeah, and I think it starts with our culture, right? I mean, we haven't been kind of enculturated to look within to find out what we are uniquely qualified for. We've really been, we came out of the womb and basically we were told you're not valuable unless you produce something valuable. And so that's why we went into the learned and earned, and focus on our identity based on what we can do in the world, based on what the world thinks is valuable. And so, a lot of the men I spoke to in the federal prison would talk about this. I said, well, what would you dream of being when you were a kid? And many of them, it was not what they were doing for a living. But in further investigating, the reason they had gotten into these high, power positions, so to speak, and really pushed for success was, one, they felt that that was what was expected of them. Either they had parents that really, to your point, pushed them, to make something of themselves. or they had experiences where they had nothing and they swore they were never going to have that for their family. And so they worked really hard to kind of as an antithesis, right, to their own experience. But either way, it wasn't about going in and saying, what am I uniquely qualified for as who I'm made to be? And how can I, work with that information to kind of develop myself in the outside world? We're really not taught to look at it that way.
Most people, and I'm in this camp,
Mhm.
that went to college, are not working in the field that we got our degree in.
Right.
My degree was in communications, although it took me, I guess I've been doing this now 4 years, Amnon, 3 years, since 2018. I've been doing this, so I'm kinda getting back to it. So I just wanna talk all day. That's, I'm not kidding anybody. I just wanna talk all day, and I have a curious mind, so I love asking questions. But do we eventually come around to some of our innate skills later on in life when we end up in a job that wasn't our major in college or focus in high school?
Such a great question. Well, for the longest time, it was called the midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Now people talk about the quarter life crisis and now we're younger and younger. It
Oh,
seems like there's
wait,
crises everywhere, right?
when does the quarter life crisis happen? At
Yeah, so
25-ish?
that was a new term. I forgot whether that came out in 2016, 17,
Oh,
18, something like that,
lord.
maybe even before. But the quarter life crisis showing these young 20 somethings, who were
Yeah.
having identity crisis.
Mm.
And what I believe the traditional midlife crisis was really about is that, we can only go so far throughout our lives and not be who we came to be and shed our value fully. And so, that was the point where most of us, or again, from a cultural perspective, most people getting to that midlife place and realizing that they weren't really showing up in the way that was most innate to them. Not that any of us were conscious of this, right? But that was really what was going on. It wasn't a crisis, of not having what we needed or not being in the right relationship. It was really a crisis of self, and that I haven't been putting out, that value that I came in to really deliver. And so I think to your point, I truly believe that the value we have, is both in our innate and our learned and earned, right? And our acquired. And those together become what I call the zone of impact, right? Zone of brilliance plus zone of achievement equals zone of impact. And those things that we can work, alongside. So anything we've learned and earned over the years is always going to be there to help
Mm.
sustain and support our zone of genius, as it were. And we just don't always recognize it because we're thinking in linear terms, right? We're thinking in terms of the career either that we've had or that we're supposed to have or that we want to have, and we don't think of value in a more holistic sense,
Yeah.
impact, right? What
Yes.
impact am I making and how am I doing that?
Yeah.
So I think it's just whatever we do, we're going to be adding, we can't help it. We're always going to be in our acting from our genius to some extent. We're just not always going to be aware of it. What I always say though is the more we can become intentional, right? The more awareness we have, the more intentional we can be to actually focus on those areas of genius and be more effective, more impactful.
Yeah, and I think most people are a bigger help and have more of an impact than they think they do,
Always.
because like you said earlier, they say something, but we didn't really focus on that. And it could have been 20 years ago, in a company they were working in, and some young worker spent some time around them, and they said 1 or 2 things that just stuck with that coworker, and they took it and ran with it. So I think a lot of people are more impactful than they think they are. But I also like to ask people, if money didn't matter, would you be doing what you did today professionally? And I think most people would say no.
Correct. Most people say no. That's absolutely true. And that's what the men I worked with in federal prison, pretty much said is that, would you have seen that you would be, where you are today? And we didn't necessarily mean prison. We
Yeah.
meant, from the point of view of what they had accomplished. And, none of us really, I think, see these things, we go for the destination. But at the end of the day, life is not about destination points. I mean, the only two destinations we really have is birth and death, right? Like we start here and we end here, and everything else is a process. So if we stop thinking in terms of destination, like I've got to get there, and we start saying, how much am I enjoying the process that I'm currently in? then then it makes more sense to really start to define these value traits, right? Because like I always say, I used to say to the men, I said, you're making an impact all the time. The question is it a positive or negative one?
True. True.
And what do you want? And so I feel that it is important. I mean, we are always making impact. What they say, you never know who's watching,
Yes.
and
Oh, yeah.
and who you're influencing.
Yep. We are here with Traci Phillips, the Innate Coach. Traci is a member of RD27, Bull City Business Leaders. They meet Thursday mornings at 11:30 right now on Zoom. So if you want to meet some very impressive members of the small business community, just good people, please go visit them. Today's show is brought to you by Oak City Tech. Folks, we remind you on a regular basis that Facebook owns your Facebook pages. LinkedIn could shut you down. Instagram could shut you down for whatever reason you don't know, but you own your email list. Keep everybody you meet. Please put them into CRM, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet that you can keep track of them, but you own that. Nobody can take that away from you. So it's things like that the pros at Oak City Tech can help you with to communicate with your former and current and hopefully future clients. So go to oakcitytech.com, tell them what you're looking for. I know they'll be able to help you. All right, Traci. So you are a strategist slash coach slash helper. You're a speaker and an author. I know you just wrote your first book. We're going to talk about that. But of those three parts of your professional life, which do you enjoy doing most?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. I mean, I enjoy them all, and I can't say equally. And I
Mhm.
think that's always was like,
Yeah.
yes, we love all our children equally,
Yeah.
right?
Not every day you don't.
That's correct, exactly. And so it really depends on what mood I'm in, right?
Yeah.
But I think in general, I love working with my clients. I'm a one-to-one coach. I know a lot of coaches, they like working in groups, they like working with like the leadership teams and that type of thing. And I really love just zeroing in and focusing on the one-to-one relationships that I have with my clients. And like you talk, spending all day talking, that's what we get to do. I spend
Mhm.
most of my day listening.
Yes.
But like you, very curious. And so what I hear, I mean, that's really my entry level. That's my vehicle that I use with clients is hearing their language, right? And
Yep.
unpacking, two main things. What is their zone of brilliance and what's holding them back, right? From activating from that space. So I love that.
Yep.
Probably I'd say if I had to guess most.
Yeah, I tell my clients I'm that annoying 3-year-old in the house that keeps asking why. But
Yeah.
until we get to that answer, things are going to remain in a roadblock.
It's true. It's true. One of my favorite things when I first started coaching is, you asking people, okay, ultimately, what do you want out of this coaching experience? Like what's the outcome? What are we shooting for? And, when I would ask people or they would give me an answer for that, I would say, well, why? And you could always unpack it more, so
Yeah.
I always use the very simplistic, oh, I want to lose 150 pounds, let's say. Well, why?
Yeah.
Well, I want to be healthier. Well, why?
Mhm.
Well, I want to be around longer. Well, why? Because I want to be here with my kids. Well, why? And when you got to the point where you couldn't answer, any further, that was the thing you really
Mhm.
wanted,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't the money, it wasn't the weight loss, it was what it symbolically represented, what it was we felt it was going to allow, for us to have or experience.
Yep, and I
So I
think
love
those
that.
questions are important in business, personally and professionally, because the more we can confirm or defend ourselves with what we've done or said, I think we're better off for it. Because sometimes somebody needs to ask us a question and we go, "Well, let me speak as a husband first." Okay, we're like, "Really? I didn't mean to say it that way, sweetie." But sometimes we're not aware because we're so deep in the woods, whatever the phrase we use it, stuff like that. But sometimes it's good for somebody to ask you, why do you believe that? Or why do you do that? And make us confirm it or defend it.
Absolutely. The troublemaker in me, when I was in college undergrad, I went to a Jesuit school, and I'm not Catholic. I was raised Christian, but not Catholic. And so most of the people around me were Catholic. And oftentimes I would be like, so excuse me, why do you believe that? Why do you do, because again, curiosity, I'm not trying to be sacrilegious, you know, and it was really bothersome to most of the people I asked, like, well, because that's just what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
But why? Have you ever owned that belief, type of thing? And I think it, to your point, it is important, Because again, to be able to say we represent and stand for something, we really have to kind of have a deeper understanding of why,
Yeah.
right? Otherwise, it's pretty easy to get, thrown off our,
Oh, yeah.
thrown off our center.
Yep. That's the equivalent in the business world of, well, we've always done it that way.
Correct. Correct. That's just what I
Which,
was told,
oh my gosh, the couple times I'd come in and take over a department or something like that, that would drive me nuts.
Right.
It's just, but anyways, so you
And
have a,
then you say after that, so how's
yeah,
it working?
why, yeah. How's it working for you? Well, we don't measure it, so we don't know. Like, there's my answer. Because if your business doubled because you started doing that, you would have told me that. So,
Correct. I
so
wouldn't be here.
yeah, really. So you have a book coming out. It's called Looking In, and it's discover, define, and align the true value of your life, leadership, and legacy. All right, so that's a good mouthful. So
It
break
is.
it down for us in layman's terms. What are you telling us?
So my main message in all of my work is that the answers you want are inside you,
Yep.
right? You're not going to find it. We've been very conditioned to rely on the outside world for what really is fundamentally important to us. And really, we can only find those answers within ourselves and by, internal investigation, so to speak. So getting very curious with ourselves. And so looking in is a leadership book. It's about, as we, those of us in the leadership field, but anybody who's a coach, I mean, realize there's been a lot of, new conversations around leadership in the last few years, especially most recently. And, a lot of people are talking from, leading from the heart. We need leaders who can lead from the heart. I actually believe it's a head, heart, gut thing, right? We've been in our heads for most of the time. And it's not just about being in our heart, it's also about utilizing our gut, right? Because we do have the neuroscience around it is we have three brains and they all work together and they communicate with one another. So if each of those three brains is connecting with, internal and external information differently, being able to access that information is going to be highly important for us to make good decisions as leaders, right? So the book really is about not just some of this this conceptual understanding that this is how things work or this is where we're going in the future, but how do we do that, right?
Yep.
So many people's like, we need empathy, we need more empathy. Okay, great, how do I do that?
Yeah.
Because as human beings it's an innate trait, but how do I then support that and help develop that,
Yeah.
right? What do I need? Sometimes even external to myself, right? What
Yeah.
supports do I need? What cultures do I, workplace culture do I need to be in that is going to support me in that? These are all things that we need to be able to define, right?
Yeah.
So the define, discover, define, align. That's first we have to discover it. We have to
Yeah.
build awareness. Then we have to define it for ourselves and put it in working order, put it in language, and then we have to align it with the decisions and courses of actions that we take,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
yep.
so it is about uncovering that and how to do it.
And the head and the heart are pretty, excuse me, self-explanatory. The gut one again goes back to my earlier question of, hey, I had a hunch because and with age comes a bit of wisdom just because you've seen it enough where it's like, okay, I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends if I keep going down this road, right? But a lot of times you just have to stop, whether it's in the home or at work. It's like that just doesn't sound right, or that doesn't smell right. Something's bothering me here
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so my belief and and there's again we always like to look at the research, right? And there's not, I mean, quantum explains it, right? You go into quantum, quantum explanations of things, but is that science? Some people say yes, some people say no because we can't physically tactfully,
Yeah.
see it. But that for each of our external senses, the five external senses that we have five internal senses. So you kind of spoke of that a little bit. So we have we have external sight, we have internal sight. We call it insight, right? We have, to touch, we can physically touch something. Well, how many times have we heard the expression, oh, that comment touched my heart,
Mhm.
right? Or I was touched by that, right? That's internal touch. And then the sense of smell, well, we like, I smell a rat, right? I
Yes.
have this innate ability to sense that something's off,
Yep.
right? And then, so which ones have what did I, hearing. Okay. So inner voice,
Mhm.
right? That inner voice that we have. Did I miss anything?
See, and
Same
that inner
hearing, yeah.
yeah, that inner voice is crucial because if you'll allow yourself to listen to it and let me back up for a second. With technology exploding the way it is, eventually, we're not gonna be able to believe our eyes because
Yes.
I there's no way a dump truck can fly. But the video you just showed me says it was, but I know it can't. So the editing and stuff like that. But just going back to that internal voice, if you just stop for a second and say, yeah, just something's bothering me about that. And if you look into it, chances are I love women's intuition. I think that's a real thing. I don't know what the men's equivalent of it is, but when my wife and I are talking and something comes up and she just stops for a second, I'm like, let's follow that for a minute and see where it goes. Cause
Mhm.
and the mom radar comes up all the
Mhm.
time. You knew, right? You have a daughter, you and Jeff have a daughter.
Yes.
You knew way back when as a mom was like, all right, nah, I don't like the setup of this coming up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I knew even before she was born, and that's in my
Yeah.
book. Actually, I tell a story about, kind of the beginnings of me and my daughter and our relationship and as a mom. But, I just want to say too that human beings have intuition. So I believe histrionically speaking, women have developed it maybe a little bit further because we've had to.
Mhm.
If you think about kind of the the experiences of women over the ages,
Yeah. Yeah.
it really for self-preservation reasons, we didn't have as much physical power, right, in the world for a very long time. And so we needed to work behind the scenes, and we needed to have ways to be able to have some sense of control, within our lives that we couldn't get physically, right? So I think it's just been more developed in women, but it doesn't mean men don't have it. All human
Agreed.
beings have that ability to be intuitive. Actually, some of my clients are the most intuitive people I've ever met, and they're men. And so it is a thing that all of us of the species
Yeah.
has.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I agree. But as some again, moms, strongest people on the planet, but that's for another podcast. But always a lot of times when Becky, when our boys were younger and something was coming up, and sometimes she's like, I don't think that sounds right. It's like, okay, we're going with that. Now
Yep,
we
that's
talked about
great.
you being an executive coach, a leadership performance strategist, a speaker, and an author. Um, you're just showing off knowing French and English, Tracy. That's just you're just piling on right now.
Trying to be humble, Mike.
There you go. Well, I'm not gonna let you be humbled for the next half hour, so don't worry about that. Where did you learn French and why?
Oh gosh, wow. I was actually talking to somebody who had, a connection on LinkedIn. It was our first opportunity to actually have a face-to-face Zoom call today. And he was asking me that same thing. And I said, it's ironic. And I think really to what has helped my students over the time that I was teaching was that so I was at a private school in my elementary and middle school years. And it was required at this school to start a foreign language in fifth grade. So there was not a choice in the matter. And I wanted French. Everybody else wanted Spanish. And I tend to be one of those that goes the other direction always.
Now,
And so
French is harder to learn than Spanish, right? You know
well, that's
that,
what I
right?
was told. And, I mean, if anybody knows me, I'm up for a good challenge. So, and I was horrible, Mike, horrible. I mean, I tell the story that when I got my master's in curriculum development and instruction to teach French, I went back to tell my middle school French teacher, I thought she was going to have cardiac arrest. I'm not even joking. Like, I was that bad. I mean, I was in her office every day getting extra help. But the thing was, to kind of the zone of brilliance concept, is she would marvel at me because I could speak like a French person. I had the intonation, I had the accent I could do, which is what's hard for most Americans, right? Is that
Yes.
French accent, especially. But the intonation and everything I could mirror beautifully. I just couldn't remember the vocabulary. I couldn't put things together right. And so if you gave me a book or something to read, I was all set. But I struggled with the retention of it and the usage of it. And yet, I think because it was a challenge and it was something I was naturally good at sounding, right? I took that as, well, if I work hard enough, the rest will come along. And it did. And so I worked hard. And so when I was a teacher, I was always looking through that lens. So if a child was struggling, I had this innate ability to find their genius that they did have and apply that to their learning of the language, because that's essentially what I did.
Yep.
Right. So it's like, you may not think you're good at this, but you're great at this. So let's focus on this to compensate and bring this other piece over a little bit and work on it. And, French was never going to be most people's, you know, eh, focus after they worked with me. So I wasn't there to make them fluent. Right. My focus was not on fluency with my students. It was on enjoying the process of learning a foreign language.
Do you play a musical instrument?
I do not. I
I
do
would have
not.
sensed maybe you had a music ear because if you have that tone, if you can hear tones like that, I'm just curious if you played musical instruments, but
No, but I appreciate them,
yeah.
right?
Uh,
And I have a wide range of interest in music. I was asked that same question on a podcast by a woman who is actually a singing coach, and she said that she was, "Oh, you must either sing or play an instrument." I'm like, no, neither. But my appreciation is deep, and I think that's the key piece that we're always looking to extract is where is my natural bent, right? And how am I using that to add value to my
yeah.
experience?
Now because you have such a good ear, can you tell what part of the South some people are from based on their accents first time you meet them?
Well, I would need to know more about the South. Like when I was I've been living in this area. I'm originally from Colorado,
Yeah.
but been living in this particular area for about 14 years now. But when I was in Europe, we learned a lot about the different regions and also about the accents and how you could kind of tell if somebody was from this area or that area. So I got really good at not just the verbal, but the nonverbals. Like you could tell a German person from, across the way just by how they presented themselves, or it's easy to spot an American in the group, usually by the way we're dressed.
And we can only
But
say use one language too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But I got pretty good at being able to recognize where people were from just based on, how they spoke. I know from the deep South because my grandmother, my dad's side of the family is all from Georgia and
Mhm.
Alabama and that region. And I know they talk real sweet like, and
Yep.
there's a long,
Yep.
they elongate their language a lot. And so usually, yes, with those Southerners
Yeah.
for sure.
And only in the South can we get away with using the phrase "bless your heart"
Bless your heart.
before or after we tell you you're an idiot.
Yeah. You know something's about to come that you may not want to hear.
Yeah, yeah,
Bless your heart.
yeah. It's like a boss I used to have, we called him the Velvet Hammer because
Oh,
he was
that's
just
great.
so nice and very while he's telling you, you just had a crappy day. So
My grandmother was a little bit like that. She was from Georgia. It's like, honey,
yeah,
you always knew you're
yeah.
gonna bless your heart.
Now try yeah.
I'm
Um,
about to deliver the one too.
yep, I'm a huge fan of story because that's how you get to know people,
Mm.
and I tell all the training I do in BNI or just anybody that's networking. When somebody says, "What do you do?" I tell them immediately go to a story because in the story, there's a solution of how you
Mhm.
help the client. At the end of the day, we can put a title on whatever we are, whatever we do, but at the end of the day, we help. We help clients, stuff like that. So I love stories. One of my favorite questions asked on the show to guests is, uh, you are married to Jeff. So
Yes.
how did you and Jeff meet? And more importantly, do you both tell the story the same way?
Oh, guaranteed we do not tell the story the same way.
Can I just jump in here? Do you tell people he tells it better?
Well, we just tell it from our own perspective, so we're gonna tell it differently. I mean, he thinks so, that is a very funny story. So we actually met on Match.com,
Nice.
and this was when Match.com was in its early, infancy, and, I had recently moved from the Boston area, Massachusetts, where I had been teaching prior to Baltimore, Maryland. And before, I guess after I had left, about 2 weeks into it, my girlfriends, we were all single together. My girlfriends from Massachusetts, and they called me, and they had apparently been all out on a girls' night, and they
Mhm.
decided to make this pact that they were all going to do Match.com, and so that I needed to be a part of this whole thing. I said I wasn't there. I didn't agree to that, and I'm absolutely not doing it. And this whole online dating thing just didn't. It sounded a little weird to me. And I think it was a month after that, I got to speaking to a neighbor and she was moving out. And I said, oh, and she's like, oh, I'm getting married. And well, where'd you meet? Oh, Match.com. I'm like, what is this Match.com stuff? It's like everybody's going on Match.com. And then once I started my new job, I was meeting my colleagues, and one of them had just gotten married. And as I was talking to her, I asked how she had met her husband. She says Match.com. I'm like, okay, that's 3 times now.
There's your sign right there.
That was my sign. And so she was like, it is a great way to meet people. You're new to the area, just try it out. She had had great experiences. This was my colleague at school. So I was on it for a little bit and I met some nice men, but nothing major. And I was about to get off of it. And I happened to see Jeff's profile, and he's from Annapolis. So, I'm in Baltimore, he's in Annapolis, about an hour and a half away. So at the time there was this, I don't know if it still exists, but there was this thing, the virtual wink. You could just show interest by just like
Oh,
virtually
okay.
winking at
Right.
someone. So I winked at him. And the next day I get this message, and he's like, I know this is going to sound like a line. He says, but this is just crazy synchronicity. I just happened to be looking at your profile yesterday, and then I got a call and I had to get off. And when I came back, you had winked at me. He's like, I thought you were like watching or something. It was kind of weird. And so we got to talking. Eventually he took me to a French restaurant that's in Annapolis for our first date, and proposed exactly a year to the day a year later,
Wow.
at the same restaurant. And the funny story was that, speaking of French, so the owners were good friends of his, and so he went to ask them, how do you phonetically spell out "will you marry me" in French? And he practiced it all day, and he was preparing. And
All
when we
right.
got there, I thought we were just celebrating our 1 year anniversary of dating. And I was like, wow, everybody's making such a big deal about this. I mean, it is special, but geez, like it felt like the red carpet treatment. So I was a little thrown, and he gave the ring to the owners, and they were putting it in this dessert.
Oh,
They brought it out in the
no.
dessert, and I at the time was like kind of not trying to eat too much sweets. So Jeff kept pushing the dessert
Mm.
in my way, and I was like, no, you can have it. And he's like, no, you should try it. And I'm like, no, I really don't want any. And so it was this push and pull. And so finally he cut into it and pushes it back to me. And there's this ring, and he comes around and he gets down on one knee, and he's saying, will you marry me in French? And I couldn't understand him.
Oh,
So I'm like,
no.
I don't get, what are you saying? Speak English. I kind of botched his proposal a little bit.
Yeah, I think he would say that too, right?
Yeah, but he thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, oh,
He's
yeah?
like, he tells the story a little differently. I'm like, yeah, I totally ruined it. He's like, oh no, it was very quaint and funny, and a big
No, he
laugh. But
he he got the intended result he was looking for, a
he
yes.
did. He did. It was so sweet. And it was very special. And even to this day, it's a very special, that restaurant's a very special place for us.
Cool. Now, I have never been on a dating site because I'm that old where when I was dating my wife, Becky, there was no internet. Well, there
Right.
was, but it was barely. What was it in his profile that stopped you for a second to go, "Oh, that's kinda interesting."
You know what it was, Mike? It's actually kind of funny. I tell him this. I'm like, you actually I wasn't sure if you were really you. I said, I looked at your picture, and he's very handsome, and he had one of his modeling pictures up there. So I'm like, okay, either he wrote his profile and that's not a picture of him, or that's a picture of him and his mother wrote his profile because you can't be that attractive and put together such a well, again, I come from an English background in writing. So I'm like, you just can't have it all. So there's something not right about this.
Did he agree or just take the fifth?
No, he did both. Like
Uh,
it was him.
mhm.
But it was funny because when we were talking about that, that was one of the first things I said on our date. And he says, oh, and he told me some funny stories about, some of the women he had met prior and showed up and didn't know it was them because the picture didn't
Yes.
match the person
Yeah.
in real life. And we
And
we all had some of those stories a little bit, but
well,
yeah.
and that should be your red flag, and really the only red flag you need is, "Why am I not seeing you today? I don't need to see a high school picture." We're
Correct.
both 28 or, whatever the age is, like, "Can you just a little honesty here? Because
I
I'm
mean, do
gonna
you
find
think
out."
you're right? Do you think I'm not going to find out? Like, I'm not sure. If you just catch me, there's something you
Yeah,
can do in that date that's going to persuade me now that
yeah,
you've lied to me. What
no,
you look like.
yeah, I know. That is a
Um,
good story. When I do meet Jeff, I will ask him his version of the story, so I look
oh
forward to
yes,
that, so,
definitely.
and you 2 have a high school daughter,
We
and we're
do.
talking about before the show, I raised 2 boys with my wife, so I have 4 nieces, I love them, and I raised them. What in the world is it like to raise a daughter? Oh,
Ugh, and I was referring to the fact that my last teaching, my
mhm,
last part of my teaching career, I was at an all boys school. So I was primed to raise boys.
yep,
Like I was all ready to have, not that I either way was fine. We always joke that Madison had to be a girl because Jeff and I could not agree on a boy's name.
mm.
We say that, he probably would have had to name himself when he got old enough because we just could not agree. But we could agree on a girl's name, so it's a good thing she was a girl. Madison I think is a lot of times only children are, but she went through some tough stuff. She had to have 3 surgeries before she was 2, and I
Wow,
really do believe those who go through a lot of, hard knocks, so to speak, early on are different individuals, right? They have a strength about them. They have a resilience about them. And I've watched her, and I always felt that my job as a parent, is really to support who she's meant to be, not make her a mini me,
mhm,
or a version of what I think she should be. So it's been a real delight actually watching her over the years and seeing how, she's kind of coming into herself. And she absolutely loves high school. I mean, we weren't
good,
we weren't sure, obviously we all have been through this kind of weird transition in school, and she was virtual her final year at the K through 8 school she
mhm,
was going to, and had only known her entire life. And we weren't sure how this transitioned to now a 900, she goes from this little school to there's 900 kids in this high school, but she's an extrovert and is doing incredibly well.
Do you have to catch yourself between a mom answer and a coach/strategist answer sometime?
Not at all. That's me. I'm like I show up as I am, and I think I've always thought like a coach.
Yeah,
Even when I was little, it's just kind of the way I think. And you know, at the same time, coaching is all about empowering, helping build empowerment, right, in your clients. And as a mom, that's what I want too. I want my daughter to be empowered,
mm,
right, to be the person she came to be, to make the decisions that she, going to be most in alignment, with who she is and her integrity. And so going about that, it needs to be a thoughtful process,
yes,
because it's very easy the knee jerk parent, right, kind of control. You can like take control, or want to take control because of all sorts of reasons. um Sometimes does need to take the back seat.
yeah,
So
mm,
yeah, it's kind of like what you were saying about being a grandparent. I mean, I remember when I was a teacher before I was married and had Madison, people say you'll understand when you have kids.
yes,
And
yep,
it is true, as much as you don't
it
want to hear
is,
that because it
yep.
sounds like somebody's, kind of
Well, and you don't
talking down to
know
you, but
yeah, and right now, here's a great chance, thanks for the segue to bring in my grandson, Oliver, which, by the way, I am happy to offer advice to my son on how to raise his son. I got no problem doing that. But it's one of those things, though, until you're in the heat of the moment and your 2.5-year-old won't go to bed, and there's nothing you do to make them go to bed. And I mean, we've all had these deals drag out till 11:30 at night, not often, but until you're in the heat of the moment, you really don't understand what you're willing to do to get your kid to go to bed.
all I say is thank God for Super Nanny. Super Nanny, I don't know if you ever were aware of that show, but that was like a hit right at the point where I had gotten pregnant. So like I think I watched every episode of Super Nanny known to man during my pregnancy, preparing myself, and continued to watch it. And some of her tactics, right,
Mm,
on those very things. I mean, if I hadn't known
yeah,
what was
yeah.
more effective, because it's counterintuitive. A lot of the
Yes,
stuff
makes
that's
no sense.
psychologically
Yes.
effective is counterintuitive to the moment that we're in.
But the kid's 2.5, and he doesn't Oliver doesn't really care. He goes, "I'm not going to bed. I don't wanna go to bed there. That room scares me," or, "I don't feel good," and, you just there's no logic to it, so and I remember, and I'm sure you did this too, because we all did that. Well, what my kids are gonna go to bed, they'll be in bed every night at 8 o'clock, and they're gonna eat well, and they're gonna study, and like, well, about, 6 hours after you bring them home and you can't get them to stop crying because they can't tell you why, that rule book's out the window.
It's so true. And that's, I think, the thing is that we figure it out as we go along. And, we're not perfect and we're not expected
No.
to be perfect. And I think that's one of the things I tell people as parents too, is that, your child is not expecting you to be perfect. In fact, if you're trying to be perfect or hiding too much of who you truly are, that's more detrimental than, you coming across as perfect, so they have to see what it is to be human.
Mhm.
And that is one of our jobs as parents, I think, is to
Yes.
show our children, model for our children what it is to be human, right? Yes, to take responsibility and yes, to take accountability, but also to be communicative and let them know, yeah, I know mom and dad can mess up just like any other human,
Yeah, I
right?
think
And I
that
know that disappoints you,
uh,
but it's a reality.
oh, yeah, and I think the 2 best things we can do as parents, first of all, and it's a runaway number 1, is just show up.
Oh, for
With
sure.
just so they can say, "Oh, they can see you if they're on stage at a school performance or playing softball or baseball or whatever. They can look at the stands and see their parents, have some peace of mind, and move on with what they were doing, and that's a runaway number 1, and then number 2 thing is, if you like you said, if you mess up, just tell your kid, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that or do that. I'm a work" just something like that. Otherwise, your kid's gonna think, "Man, we all gotta grow up perfect."
Yeah.
It's a lot of
It's
pressure.
so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Those are great points. I agree 100%.
Yeah, just show up. Whether your kid's good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. They just wanna see you there and hug you afterwards and say, "Mommy, did you see what I did?" It's like, "Yes, sweetie,
Mm.
I did." And you know
Yeah.
what? That makes a world of difference to them. So
When I remind people too, in this age of technology, which we didn't have, like our parents didn't have the technology and stuff. Yes, show up, but not on your devices.
yes, that's
Don't be
correct.
sitting there at the kids' game
Yeah.
doing that stuff,
Yeah.
or at dinner tables. Like, I mean, come on. This is,
Yeah.
again, I'm not here to give parental advice, but it showing up, we can be physically there, but if we're
Yes.
not mentally and emotionally available, that can be equally detrimental.
Yeah.
Dad was always there, but he never paid any attention to me,
Yeah.
right? Kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, 50% of being there, that doesn't count.
Yeah,
In
right.
my book,
Bring your A
yeah,
game.
if you're not watching or paying attention, that this doesn't count, but we can again, as I always like to say, that's another podcast. So,
For
Tracy,
sure.
we've enjoyed this very much. Good luck with the book. It's called Looking In, and it is available everywhere books are sold,
Yes, it is
right?
currently available.
All right, well, glad to hear that, and good luck with that, and thank you for the insight into sometimes just rely on the skills that we have that we don't think maybe that, quite good enough, but just rely on those innate thoughts and, intuitions. It is
Absolutely.
a
Thank
good
you.
reminder. So, what is your website? We've been putting your phone number up on the screen. What is the website to send some folks to?
So the website is theinnatecoach.com.
Okay. All right. And Tracy can help you a bunch of stuff personally and professionally. Just kind of get, again, she loves asking the question, why? Why are we here? Why do you want to do this? And it unlocks a lot of doors when you can do that. So, but anyways, Tracy, thank you very much. Good luck with everything and good luck with the book. And we will see everybody next time on Triangle BNI.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.